Elise, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Normally when I go to present, it gives me that little screen that says, do you want to share computer audio? And I say yes, so that everyone can hear the mayor, and it didn't give me that window. Do you know where I might be able to
Please,
look?
can I ask you a question?
Unshare your screen again, and then reshare your screen. It's on that share screen.
Yeah, because it didn't, I'll do it again, but it didn't give me that window, just didn't come up. Oh, there it is. You are so smart. Thank you so much.
And in the event that Shelley does not make it, Matt, I would love to introduce you if she can't make it in time. So Matt Tutimes from the Kitsch Gabrielino Nation, is that correct?
Yeah, I hate to use this terminology, but you can refer to us like the little egg dish, quiche.
Quiche.
Without the sh part, like the quiche, but it's quiche with a ch ending.
Kitsch Gabrielino.
Beautiful.
Okay, thank you. I know you told us that last week or when we had our dress rehearsal, so thanks for sharing it again.
Sure.
Wonderful. Okay, and I think it's showtime, folks.
Okay, Melinda, I think we're ready to begin.
So you want me to broadcast? I mean,
Yes.
you want me to start webinar? You're broadcasting, I'm gonna start webinar?
Yes, with music.
Okay.
What lovely music. Welcome, everyone. We are so pleased to have you here with us today. Today, we're going to be diving into biodiversity and its intersections with LA's urban forest. And I am so pleased to share with you the lineup. We have an incredible lineup of speakers. I really could not think of a better group of people to bring together to talk on this subject. And we are going to start with a quick video from Mayor Eric Garcetti and a quick statement from him. We will then head over to our new general manager of Streets LA, Keith Mose. And then we'll have a series of presentations, and we'll start with Matt Tutibes from the Kitch Nation Resources Management. Shelley Billick, Community Forest Advisory Committee, will moderate a Q&A with him. Kat Superfisky, our urban ecologist with the City of Los Angeles. And then Michelle Barton, our City of Los Angeles Department of Sanitation and Environment Biodiversity Coordinator. We'll then head into a panel and a short presentation with Seed Los Angeles, which I will moderate. And I'm really pleased to bring to the panel Diego Zapata from Northeast Trees and Jenny Arnold from the Theodore Payne Foundation for Wildflowers and Native Plants. After the Seed LA panel, we'll head into another panel discussion on Right Tree, Right Place, Right Reason, moderated by City Forest Officer Rachel Malrich. And so pleased to be welcoming Leon Boroditsky with Los Angeles Department of Recreation and Parks, Steve Dupre with Streets Los Angeles, Jerry Velasquez with the LA Conservation Corps. And to close, we are really pleased to welcome Councilmember Paul Koretz from the 5th District. And with that, I wanted to go into some Q&A moderation. Next slide, please. Just a few notes on Q&A. So each of the key presentations that you'll hear from today, the 3 key presentations, will have a Q&A session following, time permitting. And we'll either answer questions live directly with the panelist or in the Q&A box via text. You can upvote or thumbs up questions to express your concurrence, and that'll help us as Q&A moderators know which questions to be asking our panelists. And we do ask that you please direct your questions to a specific person or presenter so we know who to ask the question to. And with that, I'm pleased to welcome Mayor Eric Garcetti.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mayor Eric Garcetti, and I am so excited to welcome you to Growing Vibrant LA Communities. I know that these have been difficult days, and as your mayor, I've felt the fragility and vulnerability and pain across our communities. COVID-19 has touched everything in LA, including our city budget. It's forced us to confront incredibly difficult decisions about services that all Angelenos rely on. But let me make something clear. Even in the midst of this crisis, nothing is more important than the air we breathe. Nothing is more central than the environment we sustain. And nothing is more critical to our vision for Los Angeles than securing a bright and a healthy future for the next generation. That is why we will continue our mission even in the toughest times to maintain and expand our urban forest. We will complete our tree inventory, establish an urban forestry management plan, and we will keep up our work of reaching the ambitious targets laid out in LA's Green New Deal. That work will be more complex than ever, and it will require us to call on every ounce of creativity and innovation and imagination that we can muster. But with the leadership of City Forest Officer Rachel Malrich and Streets LA, the extraordinary talent of our entire city workforce, and the initiative of so many wonderful nonprofits and government partners, I have full confidence that we will sustain our investments in urban forestry and create a city that is more equitable, more resilient, and more sustainable for every Angeleno. Thank you for all you do, and let's get to work. Hello, everyone. I'm Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. What a wonderful welcome from the mayor. I'd also like to take this opportunity to publicly thank the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power for supporting LA's urban forest. LADWP has been supporting tree planting in Los Angeles through energy efficiency since 1998, and we in many ways would not be here talking about this subject without them. So big thank you to DWP for the support of LA's urban forest and biodiversity writ large, but particularly for supporting the City Plants program and getting free trees into streets and private property throughout Los Angeles. And now, next slide, please. It's my esteemed pleasure to welcome our new Executive Director and General Manager of Streets LA, Keith Mose.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I just want to let you know that I'm committed to our urban forest and landscape and as how we improve this in our urban environment. It's crucial to our work plans, our future and current work plans, that we basically maintain this. Biodiversity, shade, climate adaptation are important to me because I do understand that these are issues that we need to address to basically tackle, these big issues. One of my favorite things that I do on a daily basis, I have a bird bath in my mother's backyard that I wash out and clean out every day and throw out some bird seed. And sometimes I come home from work and, I can see the birds sitting there waiting, for me to basically put out that bird seed. And I can tell you as far as biodiversity and things like that on, species, I found a beehive in my mother's backyard one day. And my first thing is, let me contact a beekeeper to relocate them. And the beekeeper explained to me that basically they're just looking for a new home, someplace to relocate. And the day, he was supposed to come out to help me with that, they had moved on. So I believe in that, basically taking care of, our animal population and things like that, insects and other things are crucial to basically help us as human beings survive. So I really appreciate that. And at Streets LA, we're going to, help with that, with what we do in our recycling efforts and things to reduce our, environmental footprint. So with that, I just want to, say thank you for having me again. This is a commitment to me, to you for urban forest, and landscape. With that, I believe I'm supposed to turn over to Shelley Billick from CVAC. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. And we couldn't be more pleased to see you continue that commitment from Streets LA for our urban forest, which is so critical to our health and livability in the city and the region. And I'm really honored to welcome Matt Tutimez. Matt is the son of John Tutimez Jr., who is an elder of the Quiche Gabrieleño Band of Mission Indians, some of the first people who inhabited the land that we now live on. And he's a member of the Quiche Gabrieleño Nation. He serves as a tribal biologist, and he's designated because he knows this deep ecological knowledge that was taught to him by his elders, including Chief Ernie Tutimez Salas. And it's so touching for me to understand. There's so much knowledge all around us. And I have to tell you something just short and personal. I moved to Los Angeles in the 70s from Mexico City, and I was keenly aware of my Mexican heritage, but I really didn't know about the tribal heritage that exists all around us. And he knows so much about the plants, the trees, the wildlife, and these are all critical to our health and to our sustainability in the face of our changing climate and changing world, really. So with that, I'm really honored to present to you Matt Tutimez.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for that beautiful introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Tutimez, biologist for the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians, Quiche Nation. Just want to thank you for allowing me to speak today to give our little perspective on our plants and animal appreciation, where we find the resources in them. Next slide, please. But first, before we start out, I would like to start out how we always start out, how my uncle always started out, in prayer, just to give a blessing over our talk today and to give appreciation to our Creator who is providing this beautiful time together today. So if we could play my uncle's prayer.
Let us pray to the four directions: the east, the south, the west, norte. The east represents the light of wisdom, illumination, freshness, peace, and understanding. From the south comes the power of life, brutality, growth, and warmth. From the west represents of maturity, autumn, rain, snow, thunder, and also death, or the quality of things coming to an end. And from the north comes the cold purifying winds, the cleansing of austerity, the strength of endurance, and the white snows and hairs of old age. Nawika, Aok, Anek, Tamik, Guata, Tayai Hanuka, Aho.
Thank you so much. And as we go on, I just, before I get started, I just wanted to give appreciation to my elders. Next slide, please. That have provided, mainly my uncle, a lot of this information that I'm going to be sharing today. Next slide, please. And these are our aunts and elders who have fortunately carried this information in their head. Next slide. As we go and explain this, and in particular, some of these elders being here, Felicitas, I never knew her. However, she's been written in a lot of the history books. Next slide, please. That her grandson, Alex, who's one of our elders still alive today, he never even knew his grandmother was in these history books. And that's kind of how our tribe has always been. We've been very quiet, very to ourselves. And now our generation understands, next slide, please, that we need to give out, next slide, please. This is my uncle teaching the youth. And then here's my uncle's mother on the left, Grandma Josie, Josephina, and then B. Alva on the right, who were two of our elders. B actually performed in the original Ramona back in the 20s as the Indian princess during that time. Next slide, please. And this is my Tia Virginia on the left, who is my Uncle Ernie's wife. And my uncle and Tia just passed away, and this is why I need to show their images to help remember just their great support and everything they provided to our generation. And on the right is Vicky Duarte of the city of Duarte. That our family and this presentation is a accumulation of all this information provided from our elders. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to thank you. And here's my father, who's passed on, and all the folks that I've showed are passed on now. And so I just want to give them thanks and honor as I present this. Next slide, please. So as we go on, I want to just thank you all for being here today and for hearing our story of our time here in LA. And I wanted to start out just with first a map of just the vast area that the ancient Kizh inhabited. And it was pretty much the LA basin, including the Channel Islands. We had three major rivers, being the LA River, the San Gabriel River, and the Santa Ana River, that all exited out to the ocean. And these huge river corridors, or these water corridors, provided for a huge watershed that provided into these corridors. And all this water provided for a huge slew of resources that encompassed this whole area. And just one quick thing, you see that I have an outline, or on this map, there's an outline of our tribal territory. It's kind of the dotted line that you can see, and it's pretty much from the south, it's Aliso Creek in the south, and from the north, it's Malibu Creek. And then it goes into the mountains, into the San Gabriel Mountains, over into the San Bernardino Mountains, but then goes south through Jurupa, through the Santa Ana Mountains, and then out through Orange County. Now, a lot of folks are wonder, how are these tribal territories even created in the past? And this is what I'm going to be talking about today. Just to give you a quick example using this map, those lines, they actually help to identify and isolate a certain resource that was one of the most important resources for our tribe, that actually helped define our tribe through these thousands of years of history living on this landscape. And this one resource was only occurred in our tribal territory and in our sister tribe up north, the Chumash, which you can see Chumash tribal lands. There was a certain resource that allowed only our two tribes to be able to be seafaring tribes, to be mariner tribes, to be able to go on the open ocean. And that resource was asphaltum, was oil. And you'll notice you do not see oil south of our border, down into Camp Pendleton, down into the Lucenio area. You do see it up in the Chumash area, only up in Ventura, Santa Barbara, and then it stops. That's only the Chumash. North of the Chumash area, you don't see it. So that's why only our two nations were seafaring nations. We're nations that actually built boats because we had the resource, the asphaltum, to be able to line those boats and waterproof them. And it's because of the resources is why we had our territory boundaries, because those were the resources that we held dear, because that's what sustained life for humans on this landscape. So I'm speaking about these resources not because I'm coveting them or we need to protect them just to protect them. These resources are super important to our tribe and are considered sacred to our tribe because that's what helped humans live. And the reality is these resources still want to help us live. We're just ignoring them. Next slide, please. So in this, you see this image. It's a standard image that folks utilize for Southern California Indians. And you see this is in an estuary, in a bay where you have your fresh water and your salt water meeting together. In these locations, you had a plethora of resources because you not only have your terrestrial land resources, you also have your marine resources, all your ocean resources, which if you go to the ocean, you can have food at the ready. You can see folks in here digging for clams, getting mussels, getting all this food that can be eaten right then, and it actually gives you the flavor of the land. That's why I love oysters, because they actually give you the flavor of that location. And we had some of the best oyster beds in all the land until the 40s, until the 50s when they channelized everything. But anyway, we'll get into that stuff later. But what I want you to understand is that this is a garden. What we were providing when the first Europeans came on shore and they saw the bounty that was in front of them, it wasn't because the natives just let it go and let it be wild, such as how it's described in a lot of the European publications that, this is wild land that needs to be tamed. That wasn't the idea. The idea for us, for our families, was that it was a garden that needed to be maintained. And that significant difference of how you look upon the land has been one of the reasons why today's problems were yesterday's solutions. And that's what we're dealing with today. All the channelization, all the concrete put on our landscape has created problems for today that were the solutions of yesteryear. And so this concept change is what I'm going to be discussing today regarding that. Back in the day, there was a difference on dependence on how you survived on this land. Back in the day, all your food, all your medicine, all your shelter, it was all produced by our Creator. And your dependence was on our Creator. Today, all our food, all our medicine, all our shelter is created by man. So now all our dependence is on man. Which one's working out for us? Because the Creator provided for humans to live on this landscape for thousands of years, all the way up until just a few decades ago, just until I would say about the 60s, 70s, have we not been able to actually live off our land, because our families, we had little ranches and we lived next to the river, and they never went to a supermarket up until like the early 80s, because this land had the capacity to provide, and it still does. Next slide, please. So in this, what we want to do, or what our tribe is trying to do, and what my uncle has put forth on our generation, is that we need to be the voice for our plants and our animals that are just getting ignored and have been ignored by this settling nation that's here today. And so what I'm going to discuss today are just some of the things we appreciate about our trees. And I'm going to specifically talk about trees, since we're in a audience of tree aficionados, I should say. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So first, we're going to talk about cottonwood, because this tree has a beautiful relationship to me and to my personal family, the Jutima side of the family. Cottonwood actually, the town that I come from, Los Alamitos, is named after cottonwood. Los Alamitos means the little cottonwood. And where did it get that name? Actually, from the original village name that's in the Long Beach area. the area where Long Beach State, as well as the Veterans Hospital, they all encompass, and Rancho Alamitos, they all encompass this huge hillside that was known as Puvungna. Puvungna in the original language actually means the place of the cotton ball, showing the significance of that fruit or that seed that comes out of the cottonwood, that it was so prevalent in that geographic location that the village was named after. And we actually have many villages that are named after our resource. We have, Pasiangna in Chino Hills, named after the place of the chia. We have Kuruvangna, the place where the sun meets the people. We have, anyway, I can go over and over, but many of our villages are named for the geographic location and the resource that comes from that location. The area that I grew up in and was born in, and that my family was born in, was named after the cottonwood tree. And this location, cottonwoods were a very useful tree because of the properties that it gives. It's from the Salix family. And we're going to talk a little bit. I've been fortunate that I've been able to go to Long Beach State, and I got my bachelor's and master's in biology from there. And so a lot of my discussions are going to infuse a lot of this science that I learned in school with the traditional information that my uncles and our elders have taught me. And so that component with cottonwood, oh my goodness. So I was actually able to use cottonwood. Just real quick, in Mammoth, there was, we were camping there. This was a few years back. And cottonwood, because it's from the Salix family, salicin is one of the main compounds that comes from it, and salicin is used heavily in today's products. And so I knew that if I could attain some of it, and I steam distill stuff, I like chemistry, so I put stuff into little containers, and I get out the essential oils. And so I was able to find some branches that the local campsite had cut down, and it was all of new growth buds that were on the branches. So I'm like, geez, they're just gonna waste that. So I stripped off all the buds, I collected them, I dried them while we were camping up there in Mammoth, and I brought them home and I put them in my steam distiller, and I was able to extract out some oils. Well, the crazy thing that I found, because when you extract oils, you get the oil and you get a secondary product called hydrosol. This hydrosol, a lot of times what I like to experiment, and all the plants that I use, I like to see if anything grows in that hydrosol, because many of our plants are antimicrobial. They have antibacteria, fungal, antiviral. They have all these components associated with them, because through evolution, our plants have had to create defenses against all the molds, the fungus, the bacteria, the viruses. So all we do as humans is use those defenses for our benefit. So it's kind of just working alongside each other. So anyway, with cottonwood, the hydrosol that I got out of it, unbelievable. Nothing, I mean nothing. It was clear when it came out, and it was clear 2 months later. Nothing grow. It is such a strong microbiotic or antibiotic, or I should say antimicrobial, meaning bacteria, viruses, molds, fungus, all the critters. It's antimicrobial in its sense that it keeps, so I used it heavily for a preservative for a lot of my other medicines that would find growth when I left them out in just regular conditions, room temperature type stuff. So cottonwood has its potential for providing many, what we call today, flavonoids or monoterpenoids or sesquiterpenes, all these science words that we use for all these compounds that are naturally found in many of our native plants, especially our trees and shrubs, that our generation has no concept of, is not even considering to use for our ailments of today. Just another quick story about the ceremonial use for this guy. And this guy, he grows big, creates a lot of shade, and grows quick. But a lot of the, deterrent for using it is that it grows cotton. And it's really the female is the only one that grows cotton. You have the male and female, that the flowers grow differently on two different trees. So you have a male tree, female tree, and they both have catkins, but when the female ends up going to seed, then it creates this puffy cottony. Well, that was a very useful tool back in the day for ceremony. Just give you a quick story of our ceremony of what the coming of age ceremony of what you had to go through when you were 12, 13 years of age. coming of age ceremony included two different methods or two different processes. You could either take Datura rhytii or Datura, which is our gypsum weed, and there was a drink that was made out of it, and it would bring you into a hallucinatory state, and then you would, receive your information in that way. Well, if Datura wasn't available, or if just a certain family had this other method, here's the other method that was used. The oh boy, I'm way beyond. The other component that was used is cotton, eagle down, and you would actually take red ants, and you would put red ants with eagle down and the cotton from the cottonwood, and you would take it like a pill. The red ants would end up biting you on the way down. They have formic acid in them, and that would then produce a hallucinatory effect. So you had multiple components, but let's go on to the next slide so I can keep going, because I think I'm running out of time here.
Matt, you're okay. It looks like we don't have any questions right now.
Okay.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A for you. So keep going. You have about another 5 minutes.
Oh boy, and I have about 20 minutes to talk to you about. So the house, the quiche, thank you, Elizabeth. That's what we would make the houses from. It's from willow. Let's go on to the next slide, and let's just talk about willow. Next slide, please. Our dome structure was made after this, and as you know, the strongest geometric structure is a dome, and we were able to accomplish that because we had willow. Willow is actually the symbol for our women because it bends but never breaks, and that strength capacity is what allowed us to have these structures. Next slide, please. These structures were made into big things. Next slide, please. And you actually had community gatherings in these structures that the willow would provide. Next slide, please. Well, willow is also providing us many other components that we are forgetting about. And here's just some of the teachings from our elders is about where the plants and animals come from. Just real quick, one of the main teachings is that plants and animals were actually created prior to us. Therefore, they're older than us. Therefore, there are elders, and elders are meant to teach you, meant to learn from. This is what we're learning from willow. Real quick story. So willow, if we actually were to ingest the willow contains salicin. Salicin is not recognizable by our bodies. However, it is recognizable by a little critter that lives within our bodies. Those little critters are yeast or bacteria known as probiotics. Probiotics recognize salicin, and they actually take that salicin, they repackage it into salicylanin. Salicylanin is then now recognizable by our body and can be oxidized into our liver and turned into salicylic acid. Next slide, please. Salicylic acid is the main compound within aspirin. Next slide, please. As well as wart remover. You can find salicylic acid in all your makeup because it helps to clean away all the dead skin that ends up accumulating in our pores. Salicylic acid is used for a ton of things these days, but no one is using it naturally from the source. And so we do. Next slide, please. And what is being taught with willow is that without that relationship of that foreign critter that's in us, we would get no benefits. So if you don't have a relationship, you won't get the full benefits. And that's what we're being shown with willow, is that without the relationship with the probiotics, we don't get that full benefit. Elderberry, real quick, elderberry is one of our main trees. It's our musical tree. We made flutes out of it. Next slide, please. We made flutes out of it. We did a bunch of stuff with elderberry. It actually had 5 different names for it that from the original language. It had a name for the tree itself, for the flower, for the leaves, for the berry, and for the tea. I was going to try and pronounce all these for you, but in sake of time, I'm going to try and continue on with what I want to inform you about elderberry is that it is already known to be able to combat the flu virus, any variation of the HN flu virus, whether it be H2, N4, H1, N4, 6, whatever variation, this tree and the fruits from it and the leaves and the compounds mainly being one of the flavonoids, cyanidin-3 sembubioside. This guy has already been found to be able to go in and stop the mutations that happen with the virus. Because as we all are learning in our pandemic, viruses mutate, and these mutations like, whoa, Well, Tamiflu is one of the main things used. And I can send you all this academia, but in this report, they took Tamiflu and they took the elderberry, the cyanidin 3 sembibiocide, and they compared them. And the natural component actually did not, was still able to attack the flu strain, where the Tamiflu was not, because of one amino acid change that the virus did. It only did one amino acid change, and Tamiflu wasn't able to attack it then. But the natural variant already had all these hydrogen receptors set up and was like, you changed it once, I can still attack you. That's our nature. That's how it's working. Next slide, please. And I have so much to tell you guys. Sycamore, another purpose of our trees. Next slide, please. Sycamore, we have 2 old growth trees within our area. We have oak and sycamore. Oak, when you grow oak and you look on the landscape, oak just creates kind of, it just goes along with the landscape. It's just kind of like a canopy. But sycamore, if you look at these old photos, sycamore actually creates a beacon and creates this huge just visual area that you can see, like, oh, that's where that location is. So what did we use sycamores for? We used them to mark the locations of our burials. And we did that in many different villages, because when you're on our landscape that's mainly low growing shrubs, you can see this huge beacon that's in this riparian corridor, because many of our villages were in riparian corridors. So sycamores grew there often. So next slide, please. What ended up happening is that there was a construction component with the freeway and with the transportation agencies, and they ended up discovering, because we had actually spoke to them prior saying there's potential for burials there. They said, oh, you know, there's no such thing as tribes existing today. Your information is hearsay. Until one of the construction guys in the middle of the street, you can see the picture on the right in front of Deja Vu Showgirls. Who would guess that there's Indian burial grounds in front of this location? Well, they are, and actually they encompass all under the freeway, all under where we're sitting and standing. That's my uncle and Tia, that we did a reburial ceremony. Next slide, please. To commemorate, and just real quick, some of the items that we found in this, and what was crazy is that the construction guy, he would have never known that he hit burials, but fortunately, I'm going to use that word. They were full human skeletal burials. We don't like any of our burials being disrupted, but fortunately, because they were full human skeletal burials, they were able to be seen by the construction staff, and then they stopped. If they were cremations, like the majority of our burials, this would have never been known. But anyway, we found one of these stones. This is a Tomet stone. This is what archaeologists call cog stones. Actually, we found multiple of them, but I wanted to show you one of the necklaces that were discovered, because the 3 humans that were disturbed was a mother, father, and child. Just in that perspective, it tells you a lot about that burial ground, because that burial ground was not just any old burial ground. It was the Arlington Cemetery of our burial grounds, where all our heavy hitters were laid to rest. So that's why people as far as Yuma, Arizona, and this symbol kind of represents that, because only our religious and our leadership families would represent that symbol. It's very similar to today, like the Christian cross or the Jewish Star of David. Next slide, please. I'm almost done. I'm almost there.
Matt, we have about a few minutes before we can wrap up, and we do have a few questions. So I'll give you around a minute to wrap up.
Thank you. So you can actually go to this area. It's off Commercial Street, right next to the 101 freeway, where actually the Aliso existed. And there's a plaque there that we put, and showing just the ceremonial component of our trees. So our trees not only provide us food, medicine, and shelter, they also provide us opportunities for ceremony for our great creator who has provided everything for us. So that's the main gist of what I'm trying to explain here, is that the trees, I mean, all our plants, all our animals, all our native components that were already provided to our landscape, all they're here to do is to provide for us. All they want to do is to benefit for us. However, we have ignored them and haven't looked to them for this help. So therefore, they're all getting destroyed. And that's the one main thing, is that we always have to be aware of all the lessons that are being taught to us under every leaf and every rock. That's what my uncle always said in his prayers. Under every leaf and under every rock, our creator has laid lessons for us to learn. And they're being shown to us every day that we just need to pay attention. I can go over more and more lessons with you, but I think I'm going to end right there and open up for the Q&A. And thank you, Liz, for keeping me on track.
Yeah, no problem. We have around 2 minutes. So Shelly, if you can turn your camera on and help us moderate. Yes, we have a few questions.
Thank you so much, Matt. I mean, clearly you yourself are such an incredible treasure of knowledge, and we have so much to learn from you, from our elders, and from nature itself. I want to ask you a couple of questions that are coming in the Q&A. There's a very good one here. You mentioned several of the species that are considered protected in the city of LA, the oak, the sycamore, Mexican elderberry, we have toyon. So there's a question here that says, could you please explain that not all native plants, trees are safe to eat? There are a lot of hobbyists foraging that do damage to the ecosystem, or sadly, sometimes they suffer poisoning. Native plants are protected and ought not to be foraged in the wild without a California Department of Fish and Wildlife permit.
So here's our perspective. We don't forage at all within our urban landscape. One of the main reasons is our biodiversity has been so knocked down that for us to remove elements from nature may impact that very fragile component. Let me just give you one quick thing. I did my master's thesis on cactus wren. And one of the things with cactus wren, they always had an elderberry in their territory. And a lot of the conjecture on why the elderberry was needed in their territory was that they needed a perching spot, which it was used for perching. But another component that my professor brought up was a very important component. Cactus wren are insect-eating birds. We have a lot of insect-eating birds within our urban area. Insect-eating birds, on the first few days of a new bird's life, the chitin or the exoskeleton of an insect cannot be digested by a 1-year-old baby, or I mean a 1-day-old baby or 2-day-old baby. So what do the parents do, or what do they need? They use fruits in order to feed the first few days of the developing chick, so that it gets to the point where it can digest the exoskeleton and start feeding them the worms, the insects, all that stuff. So by us going out and foraging these berries, they're needed for the wildlife. So what we do as our tribe is we actually work with agencies where during standard operations and maintenance, if the agencies go out and trim native vegetation, we then collect that vegetation and use it for our purposes. Because otherwise they're gonna send it to the landfill, and we're trying to reduce our organics in our landfill because that adds to our global warming. So all this effort that we're trying to do is we're not going out and foraging, and I do not recommend foraging. There's also the overspray component where people, you don't know how people are managing the land, and people in LA do not manage the land very well. They put poisons on everything. So we do not go out to look, like for instance, cattails are one of my favorite snacks, and I would only be able to forage them from locations way far out. I worked as a biologist doing surveys out in no man's land. And in these locations, I knew they were safe because the water wasn't tainted. But they taste like cucumber. I mean, it is amazing the flavors that come. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to maintain the land so that we do get the benefits of the land. So we can collect the elderberries, because elderberry fruit is one of the main protectors that we use right now. We make jellies out of them against this pandemic that's going on, against the flu virus every year. So there are huge benefits, but you do have to work it through folks who know how to use them. Because if you take elderberries early, they're high in cyanin or high in another compound. And if you don't know the process, because all of our food needed to be processed, which was another benefit because that meant we spent time with each other when we processed. That's what helped build our community. But anyway, that's my goal for the future, is to still have these components, but have it managed in terms of removing these resources from them and creating products for our community that are safe and healthy.
And I think it's so important what you're saying, to really know all of these species, to walk around where we live and in the hills and the mountains and get to know these species so that we can protect them, so that we can, honor them, really revere the gifts that nature give us. So we're not promoting that everyone should go and forage these, but we're just telling you how much what incredible gifts they give us. There's also a question about planting elderberries and people who
Shelley?
do. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Unfortunately, due to the sake of time, we don't have any more time for more questions, but these are all great questions. I think that we'll be answering them as much as we can, and we'll pass them over to Matt so he can help us answer some of these questions online, and we'll get back to folks.
I just want to make one really quick point, if I may, that it's so important to also understand the local DNA biodiversity. You can't just go and plant, from any nursery and you're not getting the same kind of, historical DNA. But I'm sure we'll hear more from the folks that are going to speak about collection of seeds.
So now I think we're going to pass it along to our next speaker, who is a very knowledgeable and accomplished urban ecologist for the city of LA. And in my opinion, with the best Hollywood name, Kat Superfisky.
Thank you so much, Matt and Shelley, and big thanks to City Plants and Streets LA and everyone else who made this event possible, and for providing me with the opportunity to share with all of you today how a place like Los Angeles is actually addressing biodiversity, and not just biodiversity, but really overall ecosystem health and climate resilience and just general livability of a city. You see, cities are often seen as these overdeveloped areas that are composed of merely concrete, steel, and infrastructure. But places like Los Angeles are actually helping to set a precedent for some of the most essential conservation strategies, how we can be tackling them in the most developed parts of the world. So as Matt mentioned, my name is Kat Superfisky, which is actually my real name given at birth, and I am the City of LA's urban ecologist. It's a role that was newly created back in November of 2019 to assist the city in implementing a lot of these ambitious goals for addressing ecological health within the second largest urban area of the US, LA. So my position is specifically nested within the Department of City Planning because one of my primary responsibilities is actually to provide technical expertise to planners who are spearheading the wildlife pilot study, which you'll hear about in a couple minutes. But while I've been working for the city for the last year and a half, I've also had the pleasure of assisting, or what I like to call cross-pollinating, with many other various departments and initiatives. And you can see photographed here back in 2019, pre-pandemic, the tree team. So I get to work a lot with Rachel Malrich, LA City Forest Officer, who's going to be moderating one of today's panels, Rachel O'Leary, Leafy, and the City Plants family who are helping to put together today's event, as well as then folks like LA Sanitation and Environment, who I'm going to be passing the microphone off to next to speak more specifically about the LA Biodiversity Index. So my role as an urban ecologist is essentially to see and understand these ecological systems within cities and to identify and help develop strategies to address not only these ecological systems, such as the rivers and mountains, but also the socio-political, cultural, economic, and infrastructural systems, which you can see from this photograph here, are inextricably interwoven with the natural environment and systems within urban areas. So what I hope to convey through this presentation is the importance of taking a broader, systems-based, and collaborative approach to managing cities and the biodiversity and ecosystems within them. Enhancing biodiversity in things like the urban forest will not just be achieved by focusing on individual trees or on just tree planting alone. It's really essential that we actually consider the larger landscape context where those trees are being planted to ensure the maximization of both ecological and social benefits. So here we can see a couple lonely black walnut trees on a semi-degraded and developed hillside in Northeast LA, an area that's quickly being developed with single family residences. Now, the black walnut is a protected species within the city of LA, and it's essentially just hanging on by a thread within a lot of these degraded habitats due to our urban development. So not only are these individual trees important, but so too are the ecosystems and communities that they exist within, which are also quickly being developed and disappearing. And if we really zoom out to see where those couple lonely walnuts occur, we can actually see how important those patch habitats are as key stepping stones across the mountain ranges, where we are actually connecting this kind of larger landscape matrix within the LA area. So aside from just focusing on that larger landscape context and those ecological systems that individual species occur within, it's also super essential to address the entire life cycle of a tree and the various steps and processes that ensure that something like the urban forest or other resources and systems within the city will be enhanced and sustained over time. So really thinking about how we can go from seed all the way to planting. But let's first dive into the first point a little bit more. So understanding kind of this big picture and the context and the importance of seeing the landscape for the trees. So as I mentioned, one of my main roles as an urban ecologist is to provide an ecological perspective in order to identify strategies for increasing the health of the urban ecosystem. And so to do so, I conduct field observations where I read the landscape around me. So I look at a place like Los Angeles and I peel back that concrete, steel, and infrastructure that creates the city. And I start to see the large landscape scale systems that once existed underneath. Even in a place as developed as Los Angeles, I can still see the Pacific Ocean and the pocket and cove beaches, the bluffs, the dunes and lagoons that occur along the coastline, these borders between the marine and terrestrial ecosystems, before they were artificially filled with sand and regularly groomed for our recreational enjoyment. I can see the mountains that, due to being located in the Mediterranean climate, are blanketed by dense shrublands. And I can see how these mountains connect to other mountains that so oddly have this east-west orientation, and how these transverse ranges contribute to a diversity of microclimates that end up resulting in an array of assemblages of chaparral and coastal sage scrub, forest, woodland, and so many other natural vegetation communities that make LA and the California floristic province that we're within one of 36 global biodiversity hotspots. I can see these contiguous montane systems before we fragmented them with our transportation systems, connecting us, but disconnecting those natural communities. And I can see them before the engineering advancements and increased incomes allowed for development in these hillsides with houses, really big houses. And I can also see the rivers and the streamways within Los Angeles that rush down from these hillside topographies during the winter season when hopefully the rain and snow comes, but then braid together across the flattened basin before they were encased in concrete corsets and told exactly where to flow by the US Army Corps of Engineers in the Los Angeles County Flood Control District. I take my ability to see and understand these systems and the conditions that created them before we introduced ourselves to this ecoregion, and then I allow myself to re-see the city, how it is that we've changed these systems over time. I understand that these natural systems have essentially been converted into our infrastructural systems, and I look to see how we've altered them due to our influence as a keystone species within these urban environments. But the key takeaway here is that the coasts still exist. So do the mountains and so do the rivers and floodplains. These large landscape scale natural systems and their associated resources, yeah, they might be drastically different than what they were decades or centuries ago, but they are not lost and they are also not forgotten. And they can still be functional parts of the urban ecosystem if treated and respected in the right way. So managing these large landscape scale ecological systems within cities as systems is essential to revitalizing their functionality and ensuring sustained health and resilience. You know, true biodiversity and ecosystem health really comes from a contiguous rather than a fragmented landscape matrix where ecological systems and these habitat patches are connected together into corridors that can facilitate the movement of species and the mixing of their genes throughout our urban environment. And these types of connections can be made at the neighborhood scale, they can be made at a citywide scale, they can even be made at a regional scale. And creating these types of connections amongst these systems and their associated natural communities will then provide key opportunities for connections for wildlife, even apex predators such as the mountain lion, which is one of the projects I'm assisting the city with addressing due to the recent listing of the Southern California subpopulation of Puma concolor, aka the cougar, as a candidate species under the California Endangered Species Act. So P22 lives and resides in Griffith Park, which is the eastern terminus of the Santa Monica Mountains, which you can see on the left of this photo. And he sees and he wants to go to the other mountain ranges far off in the distance. He wants to make it to the Verdugos, eventually to the San Gabriels, but alas, he cannot. Our development continues to pose obstacles for wildlife movement and ecological connectivity. So in a place like LA, we are continuing to fragment the landscape and these systems, providing challenging conditions for plants and animals to live. Pressure to increase development for humans is encroaching on hillsides and other ecologically significant areas within the region. Scientists are speculating that if we don't actually address the ecological health of these connected systems soon, we might very well lose our local subpopulation of the mountain lions completely within the next 15 to 20 years. And the sad same thing goes for a lot of other plants and animals that make up the biodiversity that we have here in LA and that we have here in the world. Now, there are a multitude of plans and policies and other efforts underway to address the health of these important ecosystems, which we also need for our own human health and survival. And all these different various efforts really aim to conserve and protect existing natural resources and wildlife habitats and support a lot of other city, county, state, federal, and even international initiatives that are addressing similar environmental and human health related goals. And we are really doing our part here locally in LA to address those things as well. But here in this urban ecosystem, the unique biological and ecological resources within the city and region actually occur on a variety of different ecosystem types and on a variety of different land types and ownerships. So in urban settings, more than a third of green space is actually found in backyards and on private property, making the management and enhancement of these resources and the biodiversity pretty challenging, but also pretty important. So due to the diverse array of land ownership in urban areas, creating this kind of landscape scale habitat and connectivity really requires strategies to address both the public and private realm. This map, which comes from LA County Parks and Rec, shows just the smattering of just public land within LA County. And these public lands, which are managed by folks like the Forest Service, the National Park Service, California State Parks, they're kind of the easier part. These entities are already used to managing land through the lens of ecological health. But how can we help to encourage this type of perspective and approach on all of the private property that's speckled in between the public lands in an urban environment? Well, instead of ecosystem managers, planners are actually the ones who regulate land use in cities. Planning departments can integrate strategies for ecosystem management into policies and plans that apply to both the public and private realm, which is exactly what the Wildlife Pilot Study is doing. So the Wildlife Pilot Study is an innovative approach to managing both public and private land within the city of LA for something like biodiversity. The overall goal of the study and proposed regulations is to balance wildlife habitat and connectivity with property development. The effort was initiated in 2016 in response to a motion and really looks at, again, addressing kind of wildlife connectivity within the city. The Wildlife Pilot Study began by identifying areas of ecological significance within the city of LA, which are shown in areas of green on the map to the right, and then proposed a set of land use regulations for development that can be more compatible with the natural resources, plants, and animals that occur within those areas. A smaller subset of the proposed protection areas for wildlife, or what we're calling PAWS, was then selected to pilot the regulations of a proposed wildlife ordinance. And the regulations being proposed in the wildlife ordinance really take a holistic approach to trying to enhance the urban ecosystem by addressing things like yard setbacks, resource buffers, fencing requirements, lot coverage, slope and grading rules, new standards for windows, lighting, and trash enclosures, and probably everybody's favorite today, vegetation and landscaping standards. So just to jump into that a little bit more, specifically within the vegetation and landscape section of the proposed wildlife ordinance, regulations will be expanding traditional efforts to protect and enhance vegetation beyond public parks and the streetscape to other essential parts of the city, like private property, that serve as kind of these source populations for plants and animals. So the proposed ordinance also aims to address not only the importance of an individual tree, but also the ecological structure and function of the habitat and landscape patch of these properties and the broader context in which that tree and property is located. So by elevating communities of plants and animals in the development process, the city of LA can actually do its part to support the conservation of these resources and the enhancement of biodiversity, while simultaneously creating healthier watersheds, fire safety, climate resilience, and addressing, again, a lot of other key goals here for the city. So with the recent release of the wildlife ordinance in May of this year, the city of LA really is making a huge innovative accomplishment and hopefully a positively impactful precedent for how a city can play a role in ensuring that the health and stability of a planet and the populations of plants, animals, and people living on it are protected and enhanced, creating a more livable place for all communities. And just a little note about where we are in the process. I mentioned that the draft ordinance was released in the spring, and we will be accepting public comment throughout the review and adoption process that is slated to continue occurring this summer, fall, and winter. So for more information about this specific effort, I really encourage you to visit the website or sign up for the email list to stay connected. And not only is taking this type of broader landscape scale approach to managing urban ecosystems essential, but so too is addressing, as I mentioned earlier, the entire life cycle of a tree and the various steps and stakeholders that can ensure that the urban forest and these other systems will be enhanced and sustained over time. So here in LA, we are doing our best to connect the dots between all of the stakeholders and steps in the process of enhancing ecological systems, which in turn then help to enhance the health and vitality of our social systems as well. So rather than just focusing on planting itself, how can we really start with the seed and work collaboratively with various nonprofits and individuals such as Seed LA, who you'll be hearing from shortly, to collect and process native seed that is adapted to our local urban conditions? How can we identify underutilized land within Los Angeles, such as this old nursery site located in Griffith Park? And how can we develop public-private partnerships between our city departments, such as Rec and Parks, and nonprofit partners like the LA Conservation Corps, City Plants, LA Parks Foundation, and so many others to really help reinvigorate these sites to be active nurseries that can be growing plants for our local public projects? And how can we then continue to collaborate with nonprofits and community groups to distribute these locally grown plants throughout our city via free tree giveaway programs and other planting events? And how can we even create and provide green collar workforce development opportunities that are focused on training our own community members, so we can ensure that these projects that are invested in, that are building biodiversity and converting this gray into green and brown infrastructure, that they're successful in the long run because they have the right specialists caring for them, not only because they enjoy doing so, but because they're employed to do so. And how can we also link to existing community science and research programs that will help us to continue to better understand these unique urban ecosystems? How can we work together with folks like LA Sanitation and Environment, who are going to be measuring and monitoring biodiversity over time to make sure that we are measuring our achievements and adapting and managing accordingly? So focusing on just one aspect, such as planting, will do us and the urban forest and these other systems a disservice in the long run, as this step is really relying on so many others and must be taken into consideration, addressed, and coordinated with this kind of entire system in itself, this socio-ecological system. And since we've siloed efforts into different departments or sectors for efficiency's sake, we really have to make a concerted effort to connect these efforts together and take a systems-based approach to ensuring that each step and aspect is really synced up and coordinated in a way that will enhance the urban forest and be able to enhance all of the other important ecological systems that we have in our city as well. I always like to say that a box isn't so good at solving problems, so it's about time we thought outside of it. And so I really encourage us to, again, take a more collaborative, connected, systems-based approach to conservation efforts within urban areas. And the great part about managing entire ecological systems within cities is that it will inherently ensure that we are creating more equitable investment, since these landscape scale systems, like the LA River that you can see here, it stretches through so many different diverse demographics, ensuring that the solutions that we are making for our city to be more livable are not just focused within one community, not just one income bracket, not just one race, but really span the entire spectrum and benefit all Angelenos. So as humans, we're often kind of overwhelmed by the concept of complexity, and we're taught that too many cooks in the kitchen is a bad thing. But what my training as an ecologist has taught me is that actually diversity and complexity contribute to overall stability of a system. If you remove one entity or link, yeah, it's not ideal, but it likely won't cause the collapse of the overall system's operation, since there are going to be so many others that can pick up and help carry on, which ensures that these types of processes remain sustainable and resilient in the long run. So I always like to promote the ethos of the more the merrier. And not only does this kind of cross-pollination increase the efficacy of our efforts, but it also makes for a much more enjoyable experience and outcome, at least in my opinion. I liken the creation of these socio-ecological systems and stakeholder collaboration to music. You think of one music being played in isolation, it kind of holds little value or meaning alone. But when multiple notes are connected together, the result is music. And that's where some of the best harmonies are found and therefore appreciated. So when managing biodiversity in urban ecosystems to make cities more livable, as an urban ecologist, I again find it essential to see and observe those ecological systems that are still here within our cities and urban environments and understand how they've been altered by us as a keystone species within these habitats. I then convey this perspective to others to help inform strategies for increasing the health of those urban ecosystems. And I help to identify key steps that can be taken and stakeholders who are essential for taking those steps and catalyze those connections to create sustainable systems-based solutions that consider all aspects of the urban ecosystem, which ultimately ensures that such ambitious goals and plans and policies can actually be implemented and sustained over time. So I've thoroughly enjoyed my time assisting the city of Los Angeles with efforts like the Wildlife Pilot Study and the creation of the LA Biodiversity Index and the enhancement of the urban forest and all of these other efforts to address the health and stability and livability of our urban ecosystem. And I hope that what I've shared today really helps to inspire others to embrace and engage in these socio-ecological systems-based approaches to address and enhance the biodiversity and the health of our city here in Los Angeles and therefore the health of the world. So I want to thank everybody again, City Plants and Streets LA, for inviting me to be a part of this webinar, and for all of you out there in video land for tuning in. And if we do have time for a question or two, I'm happy to take those now.
We sure do have time for a few questions. And Kat, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I can say on behalf of City Plants, it's been an absolute pleasure to work and learn from you, and we benefit immensely from your systems thinking and the way, and your cross-pollinating. You really do live and breathe cross-pollination at your core, and for that we are really, really grateful. The city is lucky to have you. We've got a lot of great questions for you in the chat. Hard to choose, ranging from how community members can get involved, to is there a central location where people can find access to all of these city programs. But we just had one that I would really like to ask you from Cindy. How do you think the city of Los Angeles can balance the newly passed whole California state legislation that urges the development of multifamily development on private land? Your map showed how significant the private property urban forest is to the whole urban forest. If backyards are cleared for additional home development, it seems the city will lose substantial portions of our urban forest. So I think that the question is getting at that balance, that ecological balance and systems thinking that you've been speaking to. So to repeat, how do you think the city of Los Angeles can balance development and biodiversity, I think is what the question is getting at.
Yeah, sure. And I really do think that what we're trying to do with the Wildlife Pilot Study is our best step forward to attempt to address that. Really, this is the first, and I called it innovative in the presentation because if you really look at a lot of other cities, they're not yet developing ordinances or regulations that are, looking at private property and how to enhance it for things like wildlife. So I really do think that if we are able to successfully get something like the wildlife ordinance adopted and implemented, even within just the small district area that we're going to be piloting it first and foremost, it's going to be helping to address a lot of those different kind of considerations that we need to. It's going to be, again, looking at how are we creating buffers from significant resources? How are we making sure that we're not just building out a property lot line to lot line, but we're really providing an opportunity for, again, habitat and wildlife connectivity to still be snaking through those kind of, parcels of property. And so again, it's, to me, when you're really looking at managing ecosystems within a city, yes, we can do so much in terms of our public properties, and we are doing so much in terms of that kind of land management. But we really do need to be addressing, again, all of that residential and private property in between there. And the way that we would be properly doing that is through something like an ordinance. So I really do have a lot of hope that the ordinance will be adopted, and when implemented, we start to be able to see a lot of the successes in terms of, enhancement of biodiversity and all of those other interrelated goals that I also mentioned too.
Thank you for that. we're about running out of time, but I saw a question in the chat from Tom asking how many of you are there in the city? And I think it's an important opportunity to note that you are the only urban ecologist in the city of Los Angeles. And I think that represents a huge step forward in the city of LA, and putting your position specifically in the planning department, I think is a really great step in the right direction. So I wonder if you can speak to your position's uniqueness and also what it represents.
Yeah, and I do want to say that it is, I am so proud of the city of Los Angeles for taking this step. If you think about it, LA is really a city and a region that so many people look to, not just nationally, but internationally. And it was great. I was able to actually present at a US Forest Service webinar earlier on this year. And I had the same kind of question of where they're like, an urban ecologist, we've never heard of one of those. Should we be putting those in our city departments? It's a very, in my opinion, essential perspective, because again, it's not just ecologically focused. It really helps to weave together the understanding of ecology, but with the social and cultural and economic systems that we have in a city. So to me, I would love to see many, many more urban ecologists on staff at a lot of these different departments and agencies. So my position was created a year and a half ago through the generous funding of Councilmember Koretz, who you're going to be hearing from later on today. And then just as a few weeks ago, it was finally then institutionalized within the planning department. So again, it's a huge victory for the city of LA, really standing behind what it is that we're saying we're doing by carving out these kind of key positions that then really help to implement the ambitious goals and plans and policies that we're all really trying to achieve. So, I thank the city, and I thank all of the community members who supported the creation of this position. And again, I want to see many more urban ecologists, not just here in LA, but all over. So spread the word about how important it is. And thanks again for your support.
Wonderful. And I think that's about all we have time for. I do want to call out one last comment here from Sabrina asking about a single website where someone could find all of the city and even county studies related to habitat and ecological health across various departments. We may not have time to answer that, but I do think it's a perfect bridge to the next speaker. So with that, Kat, I'll let you introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, for sure. So it's now my pleasure to pass the mic to my friend and cross-pollinating colleague, Michelle Barton from LA Sanitation and Environment, who will be providing a little bit more information about how the city of LA is addressing biodiversity and ecosystem health through such efforts as the LA Biodiversity Index. So Michelle, take it away.
Thanks so much, Kat. And thanks so much to City Plants and to Streets LA for inviting me to be part of today's webinar. I'm Michelle Barton, and I'm the biodiversity lead for LA Sanitation and Environment. And today I'll be talking to you about the incredible biodiversity we have here in LA and some of the citywide initiatives that we have taken to protect it. Next slide. So this slide shows some of the incredible animals, plants, and ecosystems we have here in LA. And next slide. And this is exactly how we define biodiversity here. It's the plants, animals, and ecosystems that enrich and sustain our city. And in LA County, we actually have over 4,000 species of plants and animals, 50 of which are considered to be endangered species. Next slide. And as Kat mentioned, this gives us the distinction of being one of just 36 global biodiversity hotspots. And to get this classification, a region has to meet two criteria. First, you have to have a huge variety of plants and animals, which we definitely do. And second, you have to have experienced habitat loss. And so global biodiversity hotspots are places where biodiversity continues to be threatened. So there are three major threats to biodiversity across the globe: climate change, pollution, and habitat loss. And in urban areas like LA, we are experiencing all of this as we grapple with these issues and particularly deal with habitat loss. So these three threats are growing, and our global biodiversity is at risk. And it's estimated that if big changes in how the world protects biodiversity aren't instituted, the world could actually see over 1 million species go extinct in the next few decades. So why should you care about biodiversity? looking at biodiversity is actually one of the best ways to understand the health of both our environment and our city. Plus, biodiversity provides food sources, pollinates crops, has public health benefits, and cleans the air, water, and soil. So we at the City of LA are taking action to protect our incredible biodiversity. And in LA's Green New Deal, there is a goal to achieve no net loss of native biodiversity. So in response to this goal, in 2020, my department published a special tool called the LA City Biodiversity Index. And the goal of this tool is truly to measure the progress on this no net loss of biodiversity initiative. And I know it's probably very hard to read on your screens, but this slide shows both the cover of the report in which we published this index, as well as an overview of the actual index. And the index has 3 major themes shown in green, yellow, and blue, 8 indicators, and 25 metrics. And next, I'll go into a little bit more detail on each of the 8 indicators. So our indicators cover habitat quality, indicator species, threats to native biodiversity, access to biodiversity, education, community action, governance, and management. So how do we at the city actually go out and measure what's going on with biodiversity to inform our index and actually take steps to better protect what we have here in LA? We do have some biologists that go out and do field surveys in the mountains and in the oceans, but we have recognized that it's much more powerful to work with you, community scientists. So the observations that community members make on community science platforms like iNaturalist are really important and can help scientists and governments make decisions. If you upload observations of different species on iNaturalist, you might actually help identify a rare or introduced species, or help us track how an area recovers after a wildfire. So there are lots of cool ways we can apply this data. And I do want to point out, I'm sorry, if we could go back to the last slide, please. I do want to point out that iNaturalist is a true treasure trove of data. And in LA County alone, we have almost 500,000 observations of over 5,000 species. So this is a true testament to the power of community science. And if you're not already signed up on iNaturalist, I do encourage you to check it out and create an account and start contributing observations and identifications. And to do that, you can visit iNaturalist.org. Next slide. So we have to be a little bit strategic in the city because, as I've mentioned, and as the previous presenters said as well, there are just so many species here that we don't quite have the bodies to be on the ground actively monitoring every single one of these. So it makes sense to focus on a smaller set of species whose presence will give you more information about the habitat quality. Next slide. So we at the City of LA are tracking 37 indicator species. And these are species that we're monitoring because they really are telling us about the habitat present and the quality of that habitat. So these species are species that are found in places with food or prey, water, shelter, and good environmental conditions. Next slide, please. And to help gather information about these indicator species, we have partnered with the Los Angeles Public Library on a pretty exciting summer program called the LA BioBlitz Challenge. And we are using this challenge as an opportunity to engage the public on our indicator species and have people learn about these species and upload observations to iNaturalist. So if you need extra motivation to get on iNaturalist, please do check out this challenge and program and help us find and observe some of these indicator species. Next slide, please. So our official BioBlitz challenge page, which is lapl.org/BioBlitz, has some cool species cards on the indicator species that we're tracking to learn about these species. And once you familiarize yourself with the list and know what to look for, I do encourage you to get outside and try to observe these species in the wild. So next, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of the indicator species we're looking at. So this first slide shows a picture of California quails. And these are a very cool, iconic ground-dwelling bird that can be a lot of fun to see. They have this special crest called a plume, and they can often be seen running on the ground in places like Griffith Park. And I do want to point out that while iNaturalist is a great resource for us as scientists to understand where species are and kind of the relationships of the environment and the species we see, it's also a great tool for you to learn about these species. So this slide shows the distribution of California quail observations across the city. And you'll notice that these observations are really just concentrated to our hills, mountains, and open spaces. So, for more information and fun tips like this, I do encourage you to check out the individual iNaturalist species pages, which are all linked on those fun LA BioBlitz Challenge species cards. Next slide. So this is another one of our indicator species. This is the western bluebird. And this is a very pretty blue songbird. And the thing I wanted to note about this is that it is a species that is more common in neighborhood parks. So it's something that hopefully many of you would be able to see if you get outside to your local park and start looking for birds. This slide shows some really pretty acorn woodpeckers, which are also pretty easy to see and even hear in our urban parks. They live in large groups and hoard acorns. And you can look for them by their bright red cap, which in this slide, the red cap kind of bleeds into the background. But these birds have an awesome, distinctive red circle on top of their heads. You might also see evidence in parks of acorn woodpecker holes in trees where they store acorns. So this slide shows another cool species. This is the greater roadrunner. And this is a species that might be familiar from Saturday morning cartoons like Looney Tunes, but this is an awesome species. And it's a fun fact that roadrunners can actually outrace humans, and they can also kill rattlesnakes. So they're pretty fierce. This slide shows a picture of the bobcat, another one of our charismatic indicator species. And I am using this image in particular because this photo of the bobcat was taken using a nature cam, because sometimes it's really hard to get out and take pictures of wildlife without disturbing it, and trying to get a better understanding of where species are sometimes means that you need to go off trails and disturb habitat. So trail cameras are a great way to gather data, and you can end up with some really beautiful images like this one with the LA skyline in the background. The last species I want to share with you is the El Segundo blue butterfly, which is notable because it is both endangered and endemic. We do have a population of these butterflies in LA, but they're only found in very specific areas. They rely on sandy dune habitats with coast buckwheat, which is the flowering plant shown here in this photo. And in case you didn't know, for a species to be endemic, it means it's only found in a particular place. So that makes species like the El Segundo butterfly really special and essential to protect. So I also want to mention, since we're in this urban forestry context, that there are other uses for community science data. So it can actually be used to track invasive pests like the invasive shot-hole borer, which is a serious issue here in Los Angeles. And the California Invasive Shot-hole Borer Project on iNaturalist really does help track the presence and spread of this species. And while most projects on iNaturalist are public, I do want to note that this project in particular is by invitation only, as there is a specialized training course that individuals have to take to participate. And this slide shows some of the valuable data points that this project can provide to researchers and urban forest managers that are concerned with the species. So you can see both the distribution on the left and then some of the identifying markers on the right. So I also encourage you, if you're out taking photos to contribute to iNaturalist, to make note of the special relationships between trees, shrubs, and fauna. So this photo shows a cedar waxwing with a toyon berry. And cedar waxwings are frugivores, which means they eat fruit and berries. And fun fact about this, toyon berries are actually toxic to humans, but this particular bird is adapted to eat these berries. So it's a great example of interdependence. I also want to note that the urban forest can really help enhance wildlife connectivity. So street trees, understory plantings, and other green infrastructure projects can be strategically used to enhance wildlife corridors between large open spaces or create new pathways across cities. And so this slide has a few images of how this can be accomplished. So in urban areas like Los Angeles, biodiversity and urban forestry are truly intertwined. The urban forest provides the habitat, shelter, and food that birds like this western bluebird and other species need to survive. The urban forest also enhances wildlife connectivity between natural areas by creating stepping stones, partial corridors, or ideally contiguous corridors. And lastly, the urban forest, natural areas, and other green infrastructure that we have in the city all lead to climate resilience, which is beneficial both for human health and comfort, as well as for our local biodiversity. Plus, a healthy urban forest and local environment will also help with pests. So I want to close with this idea of coexisting with wildlife. And during the pandemic, there have been some examples of wildlife coming back into cities and using certain areas that were either previously off limits or just not utilized based on human activity. And I think this brings up the point that small, simple actions in our daily lives can help humans and wildlife coexist. And next slide, please. If you need further inspiration or want to learn more about how actions of all sizes, small and large, can benefit urban wildlife, I encourage you to check out a new short documentary called The Year the Earth Changed. And it really has some great imagery and stories about how the COVID-19 lockdowns have led to incredible biodiversity rebounds. And it just beautifully demonstrates how cities and wildlife can coexist. So I'll close with a couple of calls to action. The first is, if you don't have it already, to download the iNaturalist app today and start uploading observations of wild species, particularly some of our indicator species, to plant native plants and shrubs that support our native fauna, and not only to take pictures of our indicator species, but to learn about them and what makes them special and unique to LA. So thank you so much for your attention. If we do have time, I'm happy to take a couple of questions. I do also have my contact information here and would be happy to connect with you via email.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much. We certainly do. We have about 5 minutes for questions, and I know Amy is going to be moderating those. Go ahead, Amy.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for that great presentation. We did have a couple of questions here. I think people had some questions about the BioBlitz in general, and maybe you could discuss that a little bit more. Robin had a question, is it only LA County or can it get to neighborhoods like Diamond Bar, for example? And then also, is it an invitation only? Jennifer was asking, is that still open? So is this, you can maybe address, is this an ongoing effort that people can pop in as they see amazing things, or how does that work?
Yeah, these are all great questions. So this BioBlitz challenge runs from June 7th to August 7th. So we're at the end of it, but we've really enjoyed running this program. So it's something that we might actually make an annual event. Since it's run by City of LA departments, though, it is exclusive to City of Los Angeles observations. So cities that are outside of our limits can't upload observations to this challenge, but in the future, it would be great to connect with other municipalities and interested parties to grow the footprint of this sort of initiative. And to answer the last question, it is not invitation only. Anyone can participate. And to find out more, you can go to that lapl.org/BioBlitz page, and there's an easy link to join this specific project on iNaturalist.
Excellent, thank you. I think then there's a couple questions about perhaps, have you given this presentation to City Council? And could you maybe address how can your biodiversity efforts start to influence policy at the city? And is there any way to sort of project how this might look as you keep working on this in the future?
Yeah, so our entire biodiversity program at LA Sanitation and Environment came from a city council motion back in 2017. And that motion really got our department thinking about biodiversity and what we could do to protect it here in the city. So we are very much connected with city council on that front, and we have made some presentations on our updates and efforts to date. To answer the second part of that, we as a department aren't actually responsible for making policy. The great news, though, is that as Kat mentioned in her presentation, there's a lot of cross-pollination that happens across city departments. And so we at LA Sanitation and Environment can partner with policymaking departments like the Department of City Planning to really strategically figure out what we can do to protect and enhance biodiversity. And I think the wildlife pilot ordinance is a great example of that.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. I think that's got us pretty much covered on the biodiversity questions here.
Great. Then it is my pleasure to introduce the next speakers. Jenny Arnold, the Seed Program Manager from the Theodore Payne Foundation, for Wildflowers and Native Plants, and Diego Zapata, the Nursery Manager from Northeast Trees, who together are part of Seed LA.
Thank you, Michelle. So I will go ahead and introduce myself and the organization. So since 1989, Northeast Trees has been committed to protecting and enhancing open spaces for socioeconomically disadvantaged communities of the greater Los Angeles area. As a community-driven environmental justice nonprofit, we have successfully designed and built over 35 mini parks, trails, streetscapes, you name it, to increase access to local green spaces for our communities, improve air quality in underprivileged neighborhoods, and increase climate change resiliency for vulnerable working class Angelenos. Our intimate knowledge of improving and empowering communities that have little access to green space distinguishes us from most environmental organizations and demonstrates our core mission, which is to bring nature back to those that deserve it most. Our nursery, which was established in 2018 with the support of the National Park Service and Metabolic Studio, represents one of the few local opportunities youth have to directly learn from and engage with our natural world. It is the only nursery operation in LA that is entirely youth run. My name is Diego Zapata. I'm 23 years old and I'm the nursery manager for the nursery. And my main goal is to grow thousands of plants sourced from our community's very own relic plant populations, and to teach and I've taught over 350 local youth about the wonders that is our local biodiversity. Jenny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, is my video on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name's Jenny Arnold. I'm the Seed Program Manager from the Theodore Payne Foundation for Wildflowers and Native Plants. We are one of the longest running environmental organizations in Los Angeles. And Theodore Payne Foundation inspires and educates about the beauty and ecological benefits of California native plants. And through our education programs, nonprofit nursery and local source initiative, which provides resilient, locally sourced native plants to the public, we move Southern California into a more sustainable, biodiverse, and environmentally friendly future. By choosing plants with ecology as a guiding force, everyone can support regional ecosystems where healthy communities can thrive. So that's who we are. So I'll be presenting on Seed LA today, and I'll start by thanking City Plants and Streets LA for having Diego and I here today. And I'm pleased to present to you Seed LA, the Los Angeles Regional Native Seed Network. Next slide, please. We are a collaborative initiative of partners dedicated to the protection and stewardship of regional biodiversity in the greater Los Angeles region. And this image shows us on our first pilot seed collector training field outing. Next slide, please. So our governing members consist of the California Botanic Garden, Palos Verdes Peninsula Land Conservancy, Theodore Payne Foundation for Wildflowers and Native Plants, the Audubon Center at Debs Park, Grown in LA, Northeast Trees, and the National Park Service. Next slide, please. A little bit about how we came to be. Seed LA is an extension of the former Native Seed Resources Coalition, and we gathered in 2012 to start the discussion about the large number of locally sourced plants that would be needed in the LA River restoration efforts. We reconvened in 2017 as Seed LA, and our current governing members, which you saw on our previous slide, consist of Los Angeles-based organizations dedicated to the preservation, protection, and enhancement of local biodiversity. Next slide, please. Seed LA's mission is to increase the availability of regionally suitable and adapted native seed in order to conserve and enhance the ecological diversity of the greater Los Angeles area. What is locally adapted native seed? So this slide uses California buckwheat as a case study for understanding the importance of ecoregions, adapted genetic traits, and regional suitability when selecting seed. On the right, we have an image. The map is from the CalFlora Native Plant Database. And the blue dots are recorded observations of California buckwheat, Eriogonum fasciculatum. And as you can see, the populations are highly concentrated in Southern California in our region. However, just because it's the same genus and species, it is not the same genetically in all its environments. As you can see in the images across the bottom, it occurs in a wide variety of ecoregions and microclimates, ranging from coastal sage scrub to alluvial scrub, desert saltbush, and creosote scrub. And in each of these ecoregions, the plant has specific adapted genetic traits and also has a long history of coevolution with the wildlife in those areas. So plant materials that are adapted to a site are more likely to establish, survive, and promote those ecological relationships. So we also view the LA urban core as an ecoregion of sorts. On the left, you can see a California buckwheat growing out of highly disturbed, heavily compacted soil. And on the right, we have folks collecting California buckwheat along the LA River corridor. And what we do is we collect seeds using ethical protocols from the wild, and then we want to grow plants to put those locally adapted plants back into the environment in the urban core. Next slide, thank you. So the challenges of living in our region, living in a biodiversity hotspot, and the challenges that Seed LA aims to rise to meet. This map includes the green portions, which are natural landscape blocks of California essential habitat. And linkages need to be maintained between these large remaining blocks of intact habitat to provide wildlife corridors. The pink portions are critical habitat. And these are areas designated to contain features essential to the wildlife conservation of endangered species. And these features can include water, food, air, minerals, healthy soil, light, sites for breeding and rearing, and so forth. And then we have the turquoise portions, which are LA County designated significant ecological areas. And these are areas that have irreplaceable biological resources. And some of the goals of the SEA include, the SEA program include creating new spaces in the urban environment where biodiversity can be woven through the urban fabric, reducing fragmentation, and supporting connectivity and habitat functionality. So, locally sourced, regionally adapted native plants are the baseline to providing this connectivity that we need to create to support our local ecosystems. So Seed LA aims to meet critical needs for locally adapted native seed. So first off, because of our fragmented populations here in the urban core, we need to treat native relict populations as rare species and harvest only small amounts. And these relict populations are highly impacted and quickly dwindling. And so this makes it even more important to save these populations now before they disappear. And a relict population simply means that it's a plant population that used to be more widespread and more genetically diverse, and now has become limited to a smaller area and is now less genetically diverse. Critical need. Urban and suburban development create these fragmented landscapes. And in addition to disturbing seed populations in the soil, the lack of native plant distribution reduces connectivity and gene flow for native species and wildlife and creates more favorable conditions for invasive plants to take over. And here you can see non-native mustard covering a hillside. And you can also observe this phenomena frequently in LA with the presence of non-native grasses. Next slide. Critical need. Ongoing drought conditions exacerbate already perilous conditions for plants. The mega drought has caused the loss of hundreds of exotic trees, further underlining the need for more native trees and drought-adapted plants. Critical need. Wildfires continue and increase in drought conditions, destroying precious native habitat. And of course, they're occurring at a much higher frequency than is natural for our regional ecosystems due to development. Additionally, planting fire-tolerant natives can help save plants, animals, humans, and homes. So the critical needs that we've hit upon here show that we do live in a biodiversity hotspot. And this means that we have lost at least 70% of our original native vegetation. So what are the benefits of regionally suitable, locally adapted native seed? Well, first off, these native seeds grow resilient, disease-resistant, climate-adapted native plants. And these native plants, once put out into our environment, expand habitat for other native plants and wildlife. They increase habitat connectivity and increase pollen and gene flow in our fragmented landscape. Water conservation is a big one. And of course, not to be forgotten, they restore an authentic sense of place to Southern California. Next slide. Seed LA's vision is to provide our public, nonprofit, and private partners with the highest quality native seed, along with access to our expertise and respective institutional resources. We're a model for conservation of urban native landscapes, pioneering best practices for both use of native seed and for regional collaboration. Our work helps the public increasingly value the biodiversity of Los Angeles. So just a quick overview about what we actually do hands-on. So on the left, we see California native buckwheat again, and we enter agreements with landowners, land managing entities, land stewards, and we go out and use our ethical protocols to collect, process, and store regionally suitable native seed. And on the right, you can see an example of our field data sheet. And we do collect all the essential field data with every seed accession. Next slide. So we've established and currently maintain amongst our partners a decentralized regional seed bank to meet the needs of landscape scale habitat enhancement projects in the region. We make seeds readily available for use in large-scale public projects that support our ecosystems. And some of our accomplishments to date since 2017, we have received a conservation assistance grant from National Park Service, and we received funding from the California Native Plant Society to hire a Seed LA coordinator. And we actually received funding to run a gene conservation project on Juglins, California, the endangered Southern California black walnut, which harkens back to Kat's presentation. This is an endangered tree in the urban area and quickly diminishing populations and very important to our habitat. And so we gathered walnuts and they are being grown out to create a conservation grove to help grow more genetically diverse plants for future outplantings. Next slide. So we have created a strategic plan. We have fully fleshed out collection and technical policies, and we do outreach, and we encourage you to visit our website, seedla.org. We, in the course of our strategic plan, conducted stakeholder outreach interviews, and I want to pause on this one. It's very important to us to interact with our stakeholders, understand the needs, get the input, get the feedback, and so we look forward to continuing to have conversations with stakeholders that inform our work. And there is a section on our website where you can submit an inquiry should you wish to contact us. And we do currently have seed accessions stored in long-term storage and are on the ground this summer making seed collections to add to our seed bank. Looking ahead to the future, we started out by providing pilot trainings for seed collectors, and post-pandemic, we look forward to going back to that and to providing more volunteer opportunities through Seed LA and continuing our outreach, our stakeholder network building, and fundraising. So here's a portion of our crew, and I just want to thank you all so much for hearing about Seed LA today.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for that wonderful presentation on Seed LA. And I want to take this opportunity to really acknowledge you and Theodore Payne Foundation and Diego and Northeast Trees for your leadership in the region on this issue. And also just to share, like, we are so grateful from the city plants end at how willing you've been to share some of your knowledge. City Plants is embarking on the journey of starting a new nursery with partners like the Department of Recreation and Parks and LA Parks Foundation and Grown in LA. And you have, welcomed us with open arms in terms of on that learning journey, and Northeast Trees as well, Diego. So really want to thank you for that collaboration and acknowledge your leadership, because we are definitely looking to you as we head out on that journey. I have a few questions for both you and Diego, and I'm thinking maybe I can start off the first one. I'm going to go a little bit out of order here, but the first one really for Diego, if he'd be willing to answer this. And this is maybe threading the needle with Matt's presentation, who kicked us off today, of what role Indigenous knowledge plays in Seeds LA's practices. I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Totally. So I would say that for us, Indigenous knowledge has advised our work in the ways of proper collection, stewardship of the plant to ensure it remains accessible for generations to come, respect for the land. But it has also shaped our nursery, our community, and our mission in a very unique and experiential way. So 99% of our interns and volunteers come from Latina communities who in years past also came from Indigenous communities throughout the Americas. And the traumas of colonization and the loss of community and identity still ring in the hearts of most of our youth. And this is further amplified in some who feel that they don't belong here nor there in the US or in their or their family's homeland, or even in their own diasporic identities. But I have found that teaching my community's youth to not only feel empowered to have agency in supporting our biodiversity and in our community, but also to have an opportunity to reconnect with nature, to unlearn a way of life of extraction and exploitation, and most importantly, to heal, is a feature of our nursery, and it is all very complex and nuanced. But this is simply just another example of why our biodiversity is so important in ways that transcend things like ecosystem services or our natural history, and why we all need to prioritize reconnecting ourselves to the land.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Diego. I really love the idea of nursery spaces being sites of healing, deep, both social and deep ecological healing. What a beautiful way to think about your work. I've got another question
Rachel?
for, yeah.
I just quickly wanted to add and speak for Seed LA in terms of our connection to traditional ecological knowledge, and mention that in the course of our stakeholder outreach interviews, we did extensive interviews with tribal representatives, tribal leaders, and tribal elders, and took that conversation to heart, and that our collection protocols complement traditional ecological knowledge. And as Diego said, it is not extractive, but what I consider a regenerative way of doing things. And the seed we collect, the goal is to put it back out in the ground and to support the environment. And also that we look forward to more conversations going forward in the future with our First Nations neighboring communities to weave that invaluable knowledge more into our work.
That's really great. Thank you for speaking to that, Jenny. Just wonderful to hear that Seed LA is not only considered, but doing justice to traditional ecological knowledge. I think that really helps paint a picture of the breadth and depth and significance of your work. So thank you. Let's see here. You kind of touched on this a little bit in your presentation, Jenny, but I wonder if you could speak to how Seed LA's protocols balance seed collection and leaving food available for wildlife when you're doing seed collection.
Absolutely. So our protocols are informed by the most intensive and most current seed conservation collection standards. So we collect, we don't go out and collect 50% or 70% of what we see. We don't collect from every plant we see. We collect just enough seeds to provide our seed bank with genetically diverse seeds to grow out more plants to go back out into the urban environment. And, it's usually—
Any idea how I can raise the volume?
Oops, sorry about that. I think
that's okay.
Councilmember Koretz, we're in the middle of a Q&A, but we will help you as soon as we can. But thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy to have you here. I think
Yeah,
Jenny,
so
go ahead.
yeah, so these methods and protocols are conservation based. So we want to conserve for the wildlife, for the pollinators, for the birds that depend on the seed for food. And so we always keep that in mind and use these pretty stringent ethical protocols when we collect seed.
Jenny, can I also add, we should take this opportunity to let all of our audience know that they should not be out here taking notes on our seed collection tips and go out and completely wipe out our city seed. Please do not collect from any public park or property without proper permitting. We need to make sure that, this seed continues to recruit itself and to provide food and sustenance for living systems as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you for that note, Diego. And I see from our panelist, Matt, here that he is really interested in being engaged and working with you all on this subject. So I think hopefully this webinar has forged a new connection there.
Yeah, we look forward to talking with you, Matt. Thank you.
Wonderful. Cross-pollination at its finest. So you also touched on this, and I would love to learn a little bit more about what it means to have a decentralized seed banking facility or facilities, and why is this significant? And I'll contextualize that question again, just throwing city plants and LA Conservation Corps, the nursery that we're starting. And this is in large part actually thanks to Kat Superfisky, who originally introduced Seed LA to me and told us about your work. I think this is kind of the dream for a city of like Los Angeles, right? Where we can actually grow trees or grow native plants that are collected from the region. And I wonder what that decentralized network looks like to you and why it's significant. I can definitely see why, but I would love to hear from you.
So Diego, I'll go ahead and start with that, I guess. So, frankly, the original reason for the decentralized seed bank was because that's how we could address the need to store the seeds securely. Two of our partners, both Theodore Payne Foundation and the California Botanic Garden, have established conservation seed banks with long-term storage and freezers on our sites. So it's been such a journey and such a wonderful journey going through the process of collaborating with all these different institutions that have similar missions, parallel missions, and cross-pollinating missions, if you will. And so right now, we are doing what it takes and using, again, the respective resources from our various institutions to accomplish this work as a collaborative unit. So right now, that is why we have the decentralized seed bank. And in my mind, another benefit to it is security of the seed collections. It's always good to have backup collections in other places in case of natural disaster or some sort of emergency that impacts the safety of a seed bank. And so that's the short answer.
Yeah,
there's also no fighting when we're all sharing the seed, right? It helps organizationally to support one another when everything is decentralized, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. And I think it helps our communication because it makes it necessary for us to stay in constant touch and, review what we have in the seed bank and what's going to happen with new accessions. I think that's a great point, Diego.
Wonderful. I feel like I could talk to you both for hours. This is going to be our last question, though. How do you see Seed LA's work contributing to local efforts to build resilience in the face of climate change?
I can lead, and then Jenny, you can piggyback if I missed anything. But our whole goal is to ensure that locally adapted seed is made readily available to support ongoing urban greening within our bioregion. We cannot emphasize this enough, but local seed from local native plants, from local genetics that have persisted and survived in our city well before any of us ever set foot here are the key to promoting climate resilient green infrastructures for our communities throughout Los Angeles. This is a type of stuff that you cannot procure without going out to a site, scouting the seed, organizing a collection, and ensuring that the seed is properly stored to optimize its viability until it's used. You just can't get that at the moment, especially in sizable volumes that are needed for most greening projects. So Seed LA really coalesced together to fill that need and support climate resilience in LA.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to underline the intensive training that is required to understand how to conduct conservation seed collections appropriately and in the best way possible to not harm the existing environment, but to support the environment that we're trying to build up. And I'd like to add that we're very excited. We're currently exploring opportunities to partner with entities such as the Nature Conservancy and California State Parks to pilot this model of restoring an urban site with locally sourced seed. So, you know, this is exciting because this is going to be a hands-on way for us to try out our system and you know, help get these native plants back into the ground on a large scale to support urban resilience. And we look forward to learning about future projects in the region that might require large amounts of large numbers of locally sourced native plants. And we invite people to keep in touch with us and keep this in mind, because the locally sourced native plants are really the very best way to restore the urban environment.
What a wonderful note to end on, and I think that that kind of leaves us at a perfect place. I want to thank you, Jenny. I know you snuck away from seed collection in order to be here with us today, and I know this is a critical time to be doing out in the field. So thank you for taking the time to share what both Theodore Payne and Seed Los Angeles do for the region, and thank you for your leadership. And Diego, your passion and ethos and inspiration of youth never ceases to amaze me. And very, very hearty thank you to you both for your leadership and collaboration with the region. And with that, I'm going to pass it off. We've got another panel ready for you all. So thank you to the Seed LA folks. What a pleasure to have you here. And I think we can head on to the next slide. It's my pleasure to introduce Rachel Mallard. She's going to be moderating our Right Tree, Right Place, Right Reason panel. And you get to hear from Leon Boroditsky, Jerry Velasquez, and Stephen Dupre, who each have very intimate and familiar knowledge of trees and how trees and urban forests interact with the urban environment from the private property perspective, the street tree perspective, from the public perspective, and park perspective. So without further ado, Rachel, take it away.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I want to say a huge thank you to City Plants and the Streets LA team for bringing together this panel and all the speakers we've heard from today. I think it's so important for all of us to be aware of the work being done by so many initiatives that are working to address these critical areas related to biodiversity and access to nature, the work that city staff like Michelle and Kat, experts and nonprofit partners like Matt, Tutimez, Jenny, and Diego, and the interest and enthusiasm all of our participants today. So glad that you are all here engaging in the conversation with us and getting to hear about the different angles from which the city and others are addressing issues related to biodiversity. And these issues are complex and important. And I really love a morning spent talking about and thinking about how amazing plants and nature are. It's really refreshing to spend time with you all thinking about plants from all these different vantage points. And the topic we're discussing in the final panel for today is right tree, right place, right reason. And honestly, I could take a full day with these speakers or even potentially a week to really address this topic, especially because we're looking at the different contexts of public right-of-way, our street trees, park trees, and private property trees. But we're hoping today to just give you a little bit more information and perspective to you all about this consideration around right tree, right place. So today I'm joined by some additional tree experts and enthusiasts, and I'm going to note that in addition to loving and knowing about trees, they also are in roles where they're responsible for caring for trees and thinking about keeping the public safe, balancing the needs of the urban forest and the population that lives in and around them. And we're going to go ahead and go a little bit out of order. We say right tree, right place, and that's a phrase people are familiar with. But we're going to start off with the right place. That's going to be the first area that we look at. When I first started in the role as the city forest officer a few years ago, every interview I was in and every early conversation I had with folks, everyone asked, what trees should we be planting more of? And my answer was always, I haven't seen your site. We really need to understand the site conditions in which we're planting in order to talk about the tree that's going to be appropriate. And so I want to start off by talking about that right place, looking at our site conditions. So I'm going to ask Stephen Dupree, who's Street Tree Superintendent 1 with our Streets LA Urban Forestry Division, to share a little bit about trees in particularly our street trees, public right-of-way, since that is his area of expertise, and the role that he plays with the city is working with our urban forestry division, and talk a little bit about site conditions and some of his thoughts around the healthy urban forest with that in mind.
Right. Well, thank you, Rachel. The most important thing that I find is that whenever we plant a tree in the parkway, we want to have it reach its full majestic size and grace and environmental benefits. So in the 60s, they planted a lot of Ficus nitida in LA to mitigate the air pollution, and it did a fantastic job, but they put it in small 4-foot by 4-foot tree wells. So now, 15 years ago, we're like, oh my God, they're such a trip and fall. We got to remove them as much as we can. But now we realize they have a lot of environmental benefits. So we're enlarging tree wells as much as we can. We're doing root pruning. We're trying to protect them as best as we can, because that full canopy, it adds a lot more shade. It gives people a feeling of well-being. It mitigates air pollution, which is critical now with all the respiratory issues that we're faced. So in this picture, we're seeing, looks like Tristanias to me. And so the spacing this is an adequate parkway for them to reach their full size. I'd say roughly looking at it, this could be an 8-foot parkway. We have distance from the street light that we see there, distance from the driveway, distance from each other, because spacing is important for a full-size tree. You look in the background, you see that big tree, we want to be 30 feet apart from each other so they can get their canopy. So we're doing a lot of work to protect what we already have in place we're working with community groups to remove agriperm well covers to let the tree diameter increase. And we're also working with a lot of developmental pressures. We talked about additional auxiliary dwelling units. And so it's a whole balance that we have to try to protect the trees.
And Melinda, let's show the next image that we added to this slide. So I love that you shared this wide parkway, which we have in some parts of the city, but more often than not, we have smaller conditions that we're planting trees in. So we have this tree that's on Washington, just south of downtown Los Angeles. You can see in the background the blue line. It's hanging out in a tree well. Do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between these two conditions and kind of some of your thoughts?
Right. So this was a tree that was planted years ago. Here's the 4-foot by 4-foot tree well, and this is a fern pine. Now this tree gets so large around, you can't even reach your arms around the trunk of the tree for when it's at its size. So this tree could be 15 years old, and it's stunted by lack of growing space, lack of space for air exchange. So this is where we'd want to go in and enlarge the tree well by cutting out additional concrete, enlarging it on all sides, and adding a lot more organic matter so we can get the canopy we have. And now you look at where the curb is, it's so close to the curb that anything that pops out, it's got to be trimmed off for vehicles. You can see there's even a little cut on one side, but we want to plant it further away from the curb to get, so now we have a 18-inch convenience strip, so it's further back. So this was, at the time that it was planted, they thought it would be okay, but now we relook at it and go like, oh no, we can get a lot more environmental benefits, but we have to do more work. And that's where we need, more funding, more manpower to increase this tree's potential.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And especially when we look at dealing with the city's tree equity issue, we find that in areas that don't have a lot of tree cover, they're more likely to have trees in these kinds of locations where there aren't as many options to plant a tree that will grow to its full maturity, or even put in a larger species. I remember attending a workshop taught by arborist Lisa Smith a while ago. I want to credit her for this. She had all the participants stand up and stick their arms out, and then reminded them that if they were a tree, they'd now been planted where they were going to live for the rest of their lives. And so that's, what we're thinking about is the long term, as it grows over time, how's it doing with the surrounding environment? How's it interacting with the other uses of the space, the other infrastructure that's there? And how can we balance those needs?
Right. And Rachel, if we look down the road, we can see there's an empty tree well. That's where they planted the tree, they did all the investment, and now that tree is gone because it was not a favorable site for that tree.
Yeah, and that's some of the work that I think we're all pushing towards. And with that, I think I want to ask Leon to talk to us a little bit about species selection, and I'll acknowledge that you're looking at the context for street trees right here. You've got parkway space, you've got tree wells, you've got the added pressures from the street and pedestrian populations that you have to consider when you're making that species selection. Leon, do you want to talk a little bit about right tree and share with us a little bit about the context for trees in the park space where we have, some more space? How do you think about tree species selection and some of that location considerations?
Again, thank you for having me on the panel today. And I appreciate everybody who organized this and everybody who's participating. So when deciding for the right tree, there's so many factors that need to be considered. One is the site. So if we've gone through the whole process of choosing the site and it's an appropriate site for planting a tree, then we want to think about the soil conditions, how compacted they are, what's the structure and what's the texture of the soil. We want to think about the microclimate, and the amount of space that we have. We want to think about the population of trees that are already existing in the park. How much space does a tree have to grow to maturity? And a lot of these things will limit, what is an appropriate species. In urban forestry, we use the term biodiversity differently than other disciplines use it. So what we're trying to do when we're making species selection is also to have a resilient urban forest. And so what we want is a broad selection of species, a broad selection of genus, and a broad selection of families to be represented in the urban forest, so that when we get, for example, rapid climate change that we're going through, which is outpacing all models, that we have, we want to look at species that are be adaptable, like Stephen was talking about. The tree isn't for right now. The tree is for 50 years from now. And so we want to pick species that are adaptable. Of course, we can't predict what insects and pests and diseases are going to be coming. That's why if we have a broad spectrum of species, represented in our urban forests, it's much more resilient when these species do get introduced, when these diseases and pests get introduced, and we can almost guarantee that they will get introduced. We have one of the largest ports, in the country. We border other, we have for example, the South American palm weevil, which has worked its way up from South America. Up here, our commerce and our movement of wood just moves insects and diseases around.
And I think that that'd be a great future session to talk about the threats to our urban forest, because that definitely, it influences how you're thinking about the species that you're putting into locations and their long-term viability of the space. It's part of, I'm sure also it keeps the two of you up at night sometimes, thinking about how we respond to and prepare for, with limited resources, some of the different threats to the urban forest. I do want to bring Jerry on. He's not a city staff member, but he's with the LA Conservation Corps and has been doing urban forestry work for quite some time. And when we were preparing for today's panel and talking about tree selection on private property particularly, he was talking a bit about what it's like to work with a resident. And so Jerry, if you want to talk a little bit about, again, tree selection for private property, maybe some site considerations and the conversations that you typically end up having.
Sure. Most of the conversations I have with a lot of the residents is right tree for that area they're looking for. Majority of it is how much shade they're looking to adapt in their space, and are they looking more for color, aesthetics, what species will work, what species won't work. But it's basically just having them understand that once the tree gets planted, it's not going to be like Jack and the Beanstalk and they're going to wake up and it's going to be fully grown. So I kind of explained that to them. It is a process. It will grow, but it is something that's going to take almost 15 to 20 years. It just depends on the species of tree that gets planted.
And I think that that's so important as we have people that are using the LADWP Energy Efficiency Free Trees program to get trees to their private property, to have them think about, when siting the tree, what's it going to look like 20 to 30 years from now, rather than I've heard people even refer to as maybe like a cute plant. Oh, I want that cute one over there. Well, what does it look like at the end of its state? What species potential, what potential growth there is. But I'm sure you find out that people have a lot of opinions and different priorities when it comes to trees. What do you typically hear from residents that they're hoping to get from the tree that they're planting?
Most of it's just shade. But like I say, I try to get in their kind of realm and say, okay, well, what are you trying to accomplish here? And then seeing, okay, we do have the DWP program, but you don't need 7 trees. You only need 2. And these are trees that I could suggest that'll work for you. But it really depends on, like I said, what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think we all can speak to the fact that our homes are probably decorated differently and have different amenities because we have different priorities as individuals. And I know that that's, again, part of the work that Michelle's team is doing, and others, to kind of elevate habitat value as one of the reasons that we would have trees on private property, as it does represent 90% of our urban forest. 90% of our urban forest is on private property. And so it's those individual conversations and decisions that are impacting that component of our urban forest. We do have a few more minutes. We've covered kind of the initial basics. Is there anything else that Leon or Stephen that you want to add about right tree, right place, or right reason?
Well, right now we're working on a project in Eagle Rock on Colorado Boulevard. And so we have 4x6 wells and a business district. So we'd like to put in California natives. One of the choices I wish we could have used was a Catalina cherry, but because it has fruit and stains the sidewalk, it didn't become a viable candidate for that. And, if we want to use California natives, it's too small for a coast live oak, too small for a California sycamore. So one of the species we selected was the Western redbud. And so with all these locations, we go through all the species. Do you want it to flower? Do you want it to be evergreen? Business owners want to have signage, so we can't have a dense, compact trees. So we try to work with communities to get the right tree for the right place, and balance between, Bureau of Engineering, urban forestry, and community groups, so we could all have a part to play and all feel like it's our project, not just a city agency giving us a choice that that they wouldn't all approve. So the important thing that we see is that community engagement, build bridges, like I heard so much being talked about today, even with Keith Mosé talking about the bees. You know, instead of running out and getting a can of Raid and killing the bees, he got more educated that these are just swarming, looking for a new home, and another day or so that they were gone. And that's how we have to look at the city, because the city only controls 10% of the canopy, and 90% of it is controlled by private property. So the educational component and building bridges is really vital.
And I appreciate the work that you all have been doing. And I think that, again, will continue. There's folks that have been asking about our tree list. And I keep reminding people that my conversations with you all in Urban Forestry Division is, this is the starting point. These are the trees that we know consistently perform well. But if there's trees that are really significant to your community that end up not on the final version of the list, you know, that the Urban Forestry Division is about having that conversation about what plant is going to really meet the needs of the community in that space, and bring your knowledge and expertise about the viability of the plant to successfully, you know, thrive in that environment. And Leon, is there anything else you wanted to add at this point?
I would, thank you. One thing that I haven't talked about was also the consideration of risk assessment, liability, and trees that perform well and have good structure. So, you know, ideally, we would have the resources to train our young trees so that they would have a strong structure. Not all trees are equal in how they grow and the habit that they have. Many trees that we're growing come from a forest environment, and then we're putting them as single standing trees, so they perform differently. And so I really do consider the structure of a tree, how it's going to perform as well, so that we can mitigate risk. So I'm not leaving a lot of liability and problems and heavy maintenance for the future generations. So we're going to take care of the trees that I've planted. And, you know, another important thing, you know, is that we do consider aesthetics. We do consider the functionality of the tree. We want to have, just like we want to have different age classifications represented in our parks, we also want to have different sized trees. So, you know, they're, you know, one can accent, you know, in front of a building, you know, another one has a space to be able to grow large, and it's not going to disrupt the hardscape. So those, you know, there's many considerations of texture, of foliage, of flowering. You know, we really try to take a broad spectrum into consideration. One of our limiting factors, however, is what's available in the nursery trade. And the nursery trade tends to grow what's spec'd out by landscape architects. So in my experience, we all point fingers at each other, the arborists at the landscape architects, the nursery trade at the, so I think in the future, we want to really look forward to having a collaboration among the professionals so that we can get on the same page as to what's going to be viable in the future, what diseases and pests are currently here or moving here, and what type of species do we want to have grown for us so that we can put them, you know, in the landscape.
And I think that it's so perfect. Today is just a representation of the kinds of partnerships that we're trying to build, where we can, you know, have the CDLA groups and the work that City Plants and others, including Rick and Parks, are looking at with Commonwealth Nursery. There's so many elements that it requires participation from a broad spectrum to make some of these changes. And I'll just put a note on that. Structural pruning is one thing that keeps coming up for me, just as a young tree structural pruning program for the city. Funding for that, I think, is going to be so critical. I know you and I got to sit in a wonderful workshop last week, and as we were reviewing the draft tree species list, that was the thing that came up with Urban Forestry Division, was some of these trees are going to do well. They're going to do even better if we have a consistent program for structural pruning. And I'm going to go ahead, and I see a hand raised. I'm so happy to have Councilmember Paul Koretz with us to chime in, you know, our champion on biodiversity and soils, and even, you know, the development of my position. We're really thrilled to have you. So go ahead and join.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And this sort of brings me back to when I was on the West Hollywood City Council, and this is not my closing remark, it's just a question. When the city decided over my vehement objections, and I still have a picture of me hugging a tree that we removed. We removed all of our trees that were causing sidewalk damage, but gave us a great canopy and replaced them all with palm trees. So obviously, this is the first time I've heard a discussion about why that's a bad idea that seemed obvious to me 20 years ago. But when choosing tree species, how many ecosystems services do you consider? So things like shade and habitat and water sequestration and soil protection and on and on. How many of those things go into consideration when you pick a particular tree species?
Well, all of those things that you mentioned, Councilman. I remember one time I went to the Huntington Garden and I said, oh, they have a pink trumpet there. This is like 15 years ago. And I went there and I'm looking for a little cutesy shrub-like tree. And I was like, where is it? And they said, you're in front of it. And I'm like, where is it? They go, look up. And I looked up and the pink trumpet was like 50 feet high. So, you know, we have to look at future growth with trees and even our tree wells. You know, in Costa Rica, a pink trumpet is lumber. And so now they're designing 4x8 tree wells, which might be a little bit big now, but in our standard plans, we have panels that take up some of the room. And then as the tree matures, you can pull them out easily rather than try to go cut it with a saw. So we're improving. But water is critical. I'd say water is the key that everyone needs to know, that they need to water their trees, whether, you know, even established trees, we need to water them. That's the most critical component right now.
Yeah, the long-term infrastructure investment of our trees definitely, and the significance of watering during the drought are definitely issues that we're working on pretty actively. Leon, do you want to talk a little bit about those criteria that the council member mentioned?
Absolutely. Shade being a big one. In our parks, I look for shading walkways or open picnic areas, children's play areas exposed, where people are going to congregate, where they're going to recreate. It's really important that we provide, shade, for the future. Our parks are one of the great respites from the heat island effect. So it's, our parks are a lot cooler. As far as eco services, it's really important, having, considering, all of the different eco benefits that trees provide. And, we run into some contradictory information, like some tree, at one point, there was a big push against trees that produce high numbers of volatile organic compounds. Well, our coast live oak and our California sycamore are two trees that were on that list. So, it's a balancing act of making sure that we're providing the native habitat for the native species, as well as we have a lot of biodiversity that's introduced, and we want to make sure that we provide, habitat and eco services for that, as well as the greater Los Angeles area has over 11 million people. We want to make sure that we're able to provide shade and eco services to people who live in different areas that have different requirements and, different growing conditions.
And that's, one of the challenges of our city is, and one of the beautiful things is the many different microclimates that we have. It's again, why the draft tree list is going to be a starting point, because it reflects what will do well. Generally, some of them are more coastal and some are more inland based, but ones that will do well across the city with future resources within the UFFP to look more at a neighborhood level scale, I think. And I will just flag that I do want to make sure that we have time for your closing remarks, Councilmember Koretz. But I do want to let people know that we do have a draft tree species list for the public right of way. It is in draft form. We have comments from technical experts and even some of our staff that have not yet been fully incorporated. And we also are looking for your feedback. So please take a look at our list and answer on the comment form. There are quite a few questions. It's about a 5 to 10 minute questionnaire, but we really want to make sure that we get your feedback on those areas, the criteria and the species themselves. Next week at the Community Forestry Advisory Committee meeting on Thursday, we'll be having Bob Perry, a renowned landscape architect and author who was the primary consultant supporting us in developing our new criteria and list. And we'll be going through some of the broader details of how those criteria were developed, how we thought about carbon sequestration and drought adaptability and ecosystem services in the development of that list at that meeting next Thursday. And with that, again, I thank you to our panelists and thank you so much, Councilmember Koretz, for chiming in. And I'm happy to hand it over to you to close this wonderful event.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I apologize for technical difficulties when I first came on. But now that we've done some deep dives into so many issues, I want to pull us all back to the 30,000-foot sort of hawk's eye view of things. Just a few short years ago, an event like this would have been practically unimaginable for the city to be hosting, at least. City Plants was around, but we didn't have a city forest officer. We didn't have a biodiversity initiative. We didn't have an urban ecologist embedded in our planning department. We weren't engaged in ecological systems thinking across and among our city departments. And then our world famous mountain lion, P22, let himself be seen. And everything started to change. A mountain lion in Griffith Park, and admittedly, a couple of my staffers, Andy Schrader and Ali Samard, really changed my perception of the city. Trees became habitat and parks became ecosystems. And each and every action the city took had the possibility of making things environmentally better or making them worse. And if we use, for instance, herbicides and pesticides and rodenticides in our parks and hillsides, we not only kill off rodents, but we also take down foxes and bobcats and hawks and owls and mountain lions. And when we wanted to stop that practice, like so many habits that have been adopted and institutionalized over the decades by city departments and city staff, it was ridiculously difficult to do, mainly because it hadn't been done there before and hadn't been done in a different way. So increasing protections for our protected trees has been difficult to do. And protecting wildlife habitat connectivity from development has been extremely difficult to do. A lot of the time, it's just because of scarce resources, as well as funding and staffing. All at a time when the mayor and the city council are trying to use every penny we can to get our unhoused neighbors into homes. But we have scraped together very small amounts of money, sometimes referred to as budget dust, to get things going. And my staff and I convened biodiversity experts from around this remarkable city ourselves to figure out how to even take a stab at changing the city's culture before sanitation took that over. And Moss and Isaac and now Michelle and the whole team have done such a terrific job that our biodiversity initiative is now world famous. And I was astonished to hear that there are scientists that are actually moving here so they can work with us on it. We've worked with the mayor's team to hire Rachel Malarich to oversee our big picture tree policy issues. We hired Kat Superfisky, to be honest, out of my own tiny discretionary budget, to work as the urban ecologist in planning on our wildlife habitat connectivity effort. And Connie and the planning department team have brought it forward and are receiving public comments on the proposed ordinance as we speak. And they need to hear from you. We engaged with our Natural History Museum and citizen scientists in bioblitzes to document the biodiversity around the city. Because honestly, if we want to protect the species, we first need to know what all of them are that we have in Los Angeles. And we worked with the Community Forest Advisory Committee and the Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance to engage both more actively in the city's policy setting. We've scrapped and fought for every success, and we are slowly but actively making things better. And we couldn't have done it without so many of you who are tuned in today. We couldn't have done it without the hard work of all the folks you heard from on today's panels. And some of our city staff have been working on these issues quietly behind the scenes for years, making steady improvements, and they're our unsung heroes. We couldn't have done it without the focused work of local environmental groups like CLAW, Citizens for Los Angeles Wildlife, the Center for Biological Diversity, Tree People, Sierra Club, LA Conservation Corps, the Theodore Payne Foundation, Northeast Trees, and so many others. But we're not done yet. Now that we have these remarkable folks in place on staff, the real work begins. We have some terrific visions and plans before us, and we must keep pushing them through to completion. We must continue to push hard for more funding for all these initiatives and to provide equitable access to nature for all Angelenos. We need to institutionalize biodiversity protections across all our city departments. We need to complete not only the wildlife corridors pilot study, but a wider regional rim of the valley wildlife habitat connectivity vision. We need to spread holistic integrated pest management systems throughout our departments. We need to use native plants and trees in our landscaping to actively create habitat for our indigenous fauna, and to create and implement a best-in-class urban forest master plan that incorporates each of these. Now, many of you know I'm personally termed out at the end of 2022. So after that, it'll be up to all of you to keep things going and keep an eye on all of these issues. In some cases, we're fighting pretty big money. A powerful developer, for instance, is trying to hijack our wildlife corridors effort. And only public engagement can counter that. So if you're involved, I thank you. If you're not involved yet, please join in. We and all of our four-footed friends need all the help we can get. So thank you for all your great work. And I look forward to seeing and participating in more of your great work in the years to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Paul Koretz. What a wonderful way to close out this event. As many of you know, this series is a quarterly series, Growing Vibrant LA Communities. To those who have been joining us from the beginning, we thank you, and we welcome any and everyone to attend. And also be willing to take feedback on what subjects you'd like to hear from as we pave the way for an inclusive and equitable urban forest management plan for the city of Los Angeles. It's been a real pleasure. We'd like to thank all of our panelists who spoke to the power of biodiversity and where we are going as a region from seed to trees. And with that,